Wait for a couple more. So.
It's up to you, however you want to, how we want to go.
Good morning. Thank you all for braving the elements, as I said, for coming out this morning in this inclement weather. We are here today for Dr. William Pulski to introduce you to the Human Research Program and do the overview for that. And I'm honored today to be able to introduce him because he's the person that promoted me and got me where I started here and brought me into life sciences then, and now it's human health and performance director.
So you have me to blame.
So, exactly. So anything good, you can give him credit. Anything bad, you can blame him. That's exactly right. So I'll let him give you all a brief history on how he saved humanity and where he's come from, and he may even tell you something about the grandkids. But all of his work, being here, going to University of Houston, coming back to us, and the whole 9 yards. And so, without further ado, I'll
Okay, thank you, Janice. Janice was one of those wonderful people that you run into once in a career when you're searching for a new slot and you get a whole bunch of the same old people applying for it, and then somebody from the outside applies for it. And Janice was one of those one time, and she was just so effervescent that we couldn't turn her down.
Thank you.
And it was really a good choice, and that was 12 years ago?
Yeah, I was going to say.
About 12 years ago, so it's been a while.
It's been a while.
Okay, so I'm Bill Pulski. I run for the past 2.5 years the Human Research Program here at JSC. I came here initially in 1985, and I was working on the contractor side in the neurosciences laboratory at JSC, sort of being an engineer and scientist at the same time. Developed some equipment that eventually flew on STS-42, the IML-1 Space Lab mission. It was a rotating chair vestibular experiment, and I was responsible for designing the rotating chair and the interface to the ground. And then I eventually got involved in some of the science, and Dr. Reschke, who was head of that project, kind of converted me from a pulmonary cardiovascular physiologist into a neurovestibular guy. So up until 2008, I did a lot of work in the sensory motor neurovestibular area on the shuttle in the KC-135, now the C9, I guess it is. I'm not sure what the latest vintage is. In the NASA Mir program, or as the Russians call it, the Mir-NASA program. Spent a lot of time in Russia. I think 35 trips so far, 14 months in country altogether. And then with the station, in the beginning of the station. In 2008, I left JSC and took a position as a professor of health and human performance at the University of Houston. I had always wanted to get back to the university and work with young people and try to distort their minds before they got too settled in their ways. And I was enjoying that. I was fat and happy in being an academic when Mike Barrett called me and said that he had done his 1-year stint as the manager of HRP and was looking for somebody to replace him, and would I be interested? And had you asked me just before that phone call if I would have ever come back to NASA, I probably would have said no. But for the HRP manager slot, I said, that might be an interesting position. And I came back, and I'm still here, and I'm having a lot of fun. And this is a really fun program. It's sort of from my perspective, it's a culmination of decades and decades of human research, of biomedical research that before this program had always been managed from headquarters and hadn't had a very focused effort in trying to reduce human risks. This program was stood up just about 10 years ago now, about 2006 or so. It was stood up with Kathy Larini as the original manager, and the focus is identically aligned with the agency's exploration goals. So it's really to try and do the research that's necessary to help people move forward out into the solar system beyond low Earth orbit. So I invite you to interrupt me anytime I say something that you have a question about. Well, we can also have questions at the end. Once I get going, I often talk fast, so feel free just to jump in and say, hey, stop for a second. So as I was mentioning, the agency is headed towards Mars eventually. We have an evolvable Mars capabilities campaign that we're still trying to figure out exactly how we're going to do it. What we know is that Today we have Earth reliant stuff that's going on in low Earth orbit, a lot of work that's going on in low Earth orbit, and for us also on the ground. Eventually we're going to be in the vicinity of Mars. We'll probably be on the Mars surface at some point. We may just do orbital missions. We may do missions to Phobos or Deimos. So we're going to get out in that vicinity, and in between we're going to have what we're calling now the proving ground, which is a way for us to increase our confidence that we have the systems and for us the countermeasures in place to be able to send people on 3-year missions to Mars. So the proving ground is going to be mostly in cislunar space, and we missions outside of the low Earth orbit, missions that could last as long as a year towards the end of the next decade, and will probably be a bigger challenge to crew members than any of the things that we can do in orbital space flight. So it's time for us to move out beyond low Earth orbit, and we're going to be doing that. And I think that HRP has an important role in trying to answer the hard questions that need to be answered about the human element, the human system, in sending that system all the way as far as Mars. One of the charts I've been using lately to kind of explain how this all works, I usually read it because nobody else will read it. Human travelers to Mars will experience unprecedented physiological, environmental, and psychosocial challenges that could lead to significant health and performance decrement in the absence of effective mitigation strategies. Success of any human mission to Mars will hinge on the mission designer's ability to develop and implement such strategies. NASA's Human Research Program is responsible for identifying those strategies. So in a nutshell, for a lay audience, that's kind of how I see us fitting into the bigger picture in the Human Research Program. More specifically, we are chartered, and our mission is to enable space exploration beyond low Earth orbit, using a focused program of basic, applied, and operational research, and the deliverables that we develop are human health, performance, and habitability standards, informing those standards for new missions that are unprecedented duration in deep space, countermeasures and risk mitigation solutions, and advanced habitability and medical support technology. So we truly are an R&T program. We focus more on the R than the T, but we are an R&T program. We are aligned with the agency strategic goals. We just had a PSR, program status review. Every 2 years you have to have a review if you're an agency level program, and this was a chart we developed for that. So the strategic, the agency strategic plan has 4 strategic goals. There are 2 of them that we're closely involved with. Strategic goal 1. Expand the frontiers of knowledge, capability, and opportunity in space, and specifically 1.1, expanding the human presence in the solar system and to the surface of Mars. 1.2, conduct research on the International Space Station to enable future space exploration. And under Strategic Goal 2, Objective 2.4, advance the nation's science, technology, engineering, and math education and workforce. And I'll talk about some examples of all this and how we fit into the strategic goals as we go along. Our organization is really one of the weirdest organizations that you could ever imagine. I'm the HRP is here on the chart. I'm the program manager. My office is in Building 1. My boss is Bill Gerstenmaier, so I report to Gerstenmaier. In HEO, we're sort of embedded in Space Life Physical Science Research and Application SLIPs, or a division that Marshall Porterfield runs, so we integrate with those, and when we do DPMCs, we always do them with the rest of SLIPs, but we're a standalone group. Here at JSC, we're too small and a little bit eccentric from the main focus of the center, so we're not a direct report to the center. We don't have our own mail code. We're embedded in SA, so I work for Mr. Gerstenmaier, but I'm down here at JSC, embedded in SA, where I interact with Jeff Davis and all the rest of the folks from SA. It's probably an appropriate organization in that we're really the research arm of space medicine, for the future. So it makes for good connections on a day-to-day basis, but it's really hard to explain to somebody from the outside how we're organized, and people get really confused all the time. Within the program, we have a fairly small program office. I'm the manager. Barbara Corbin is my deputy. We have an international collaboration scientist, John Charles, who's been doing that for the past couple of years. Our chief scientist is Mark Shellhammer. We just appointed a new deputy chief scientist, Jen Fogarty, who will be joining us in September. She's replacing Craig Kundrat, who took a position up in the chief scientist's office as the TCAT manager for our work. And we have a wonderful administrative assistant, Latoya Eaglin. The program operations are really based on 6 different elements, 5 research elements that are these guys here, and 1 service element, ISS Medical Projects. These elements are all matrixed to the other divisions within SA and within the Directorate. So ISSMP is responsible for interfacing all of our scientists with the space station. They take care of any flight experiments that we have. They do all the interfacing. They take care of all the hardware. They take care of all the scheduling. They take care of all the negotiating with the space station for our stuff. They're also the managers for our analog facilities. And we have a number of analog facilities that we use because we can't get all the answers we want in space. There's just not enough time and not enough crew members to get those answers. So I'll talk about those in some detail. The other elements, space radiation, focus on radiation issues. Human health and countermeasures is focused mostly on physiological issues associated with decreased gravity. They work on other things, but decreased gravity is their big thing. Exploration medical capabilities element is focused on trying to decide what the medical kit is going to look like for a Mars mission and how do we interface to the vehicle for a Mars mission. And try and answer some of the real hard questions. When you're 15 minutes away communication-wise from your experts, you're going to have to be much more autonomous than we are in low Earth orbit. And so if you have a crew of 4, and we'll likely send a physician as one of those crew members, normally that person would take care of any problems and could do it autonomously, but Murphy says that's the person who's going to get sick or injured, right? So how do you make sure that somebody else on the crew can take care of whatever emergencies are with this long delay? So what kinds of artificial intelligence, what kind of built-in computer systems do you have to have? What kind of procedural support can you provide for the person under those circumstances? So that's one of the areas that they look at in exploration medical capabilities. What are we going to bring along? What are we not going to bring along? How is the deep space vehicle going to differ from the habitat, if there is a difference? And so there's a lot of questions about what things we will be able to treat and what things we won't be able to treat. We have a behavioral health and performance element that's focused on the issues that are associated with teaming, with being far from home, very, very long distances, unprecedented distances. You know, when you're now in a capsule and Earth is one of those bright spots out out in the night sky. You can't talk to anybody with your cell phone like you can and you're with 3 people that your boss picked out, right? They're your coworkers, they're not your best friends, they're not people that you necessarily, so how do you ensure that everybody's going to work together cohesively as a team? What sorts of support do you send with them when you can't have this direct, family interaction or doc to patient interaction and those sorts of things? These are the questions that they're interested in, behavioral health and performance. And then space human factors and habitability has kind of a mixed bag. They are interested in certainly the habitability aspects. How do you lay out a vehicle? You're going to have a tiny vehicle with 4 people in it. How do you lay it out so that people can have some private space and some public space? How do you, help to make sure you have community space? How do you have private space? Where's the workspace? Where's the play space? Where's the exercise space? How do you lay those things out? That's part of it. How do you design computer software so that the interface between the human and the machine works seamlessly? And that kind of ties back into what I was saying about XMC and their work on trying to have good artificial intelligence built into the systems as well. Space human factors and habitability goes beyond those kinds of physical designs and interface between the crew and the machine to look at the environment in space. What's the CO2 environment like? What kinds of microbes might grow, and how might radiation affect the microbes, and what are you going to do about that? And how do you maintain a good, clean atmosphere? What do you do about food? Where are we going to get food from? We're not going to have resupply, so what kinds of food do you send? So one of the things that they're looking at is 3D food printing. Can you send large vats of stuff that can get mixed together in cute ways to make food that's not only nutritional but also is behaviorally important, right? So that will help you feel good about what you've just eaten. Can you get the right textures and flavors and smells and looks of things? So how do we do that? For a 3-year mission, again, we're way out there, way beyond what our experience has been before. So we're trying, and without resupply, how do you pre-position and how do you move things along? So these are the things that the organization is looking at. I have a kind of a summary on this chart, and everybody will have these charts, right? Yes. So I won't go through. I said most of this stuff already, what they're working on, but that's how we break it down. 5 of them are research and technology elements, and 1 of them is a service element. We're also a distributed program, so I talked about our interfaces here at JSC and also at headquarters, but we also have 4 other centers that are supporting centers. So at JSC, our total budget in a year is about $150 million. About 120 of that and 70 FTE are here at JSC. Ames has a pretty big footprint, and they work on all the elements. They have about $10 million of procurement and 29 FTE. Glenn is next biggest with about $7 million of procurement and 17 FTE. Langley has about $3 million of procurement and 10 FTE. And then Kennedy, we just have a small footprint at Kennedy now, but I think once we start doing commercial launches for Kennedy, that's going to start expanding. So we do have to interface also with these other centers, and we have folks that are working that have skills in those centers that we either don't have here or that we don't have access to here. So we try to use the whole agency as best we can to answer the problems that we're trying to solve. We have an extramural partner, the National Space Biomedical Research Institute. Very important partner. They've been had a cooperative agreement with NASA for nearly 20 years. They started in 1997. Their headquarters is located down at Baylor College of Medicine. They represent a consortium of some of the top medical schools and universities in the country, and they've been working for us and with us to try and augment our program capabilities since before there was a program, since the earlier days of space life sciences. Now their cooperative agreement ends on September 30th, 2017, about 2 years from now. So we're going to be recompeting for the first time. They've had 3 non-competitive renewals. So they've been pretty much in place without competition for 20 years. And we will be recompeting that contract. There's actually an RFI out today. It went out last week, I think. It's on the street for another couple weeks to get ideas from the outside community about what might work and what might not work. We're expecting the full solicitation to go out later this year and a selection to be made early next year. It's actually going to combine the work that NSBRI does and the work that another cooperative agreement does. The other cooperative agreement is with USRA, who provides people for us, and we're trying to reduce overhead by combining these 2 into one translational research institute. And I think, yeah, I do have. So the idea of this new institute is actually to kind of change the direction a bit from what NSBRI has been doing. I think they made some very significant changes to the way we do business early on. And now we have sort of migrated together. We overlap a lot in the things that we can do. And what I think we need programmatically from a management perspective is some new forward-looking change our business model, change our technical competencies kinds of approaches. So we're calling the new institute a Translational Research Institute. We fully expect that USRA and NSBRI will be able to respond to this solicitation, but it's going to change the direction. It will go back to the concept of a virtual institute. That is, it will be an institute that has very small footprint any place, and it can be any place, doesn't have to be anywhere near JSC. But we're targeting the approaches that have been developed by the Astrobiology Institute at Ames to use virtual connectivity for all the investigators and the management teams. And we're going to be looking for game-changing technology. So this is going to be mostly investing in new technologies, new research areas, like the stuff that's going on in omics or in miniaturized medical devices that's going out in the terrestrial sector and trying to translate that into NASA's needs. So we're expecting mostly program project type activities that would likely be funded for about 1 to 3 years, maybe as short as 6 months, maybe as long as 5 years. But it wouldn't be developing a new stable of investigators, but bringing in people who have specific things that can offer that could be game changers to our ability to mitigate these programs, these problems. And once that program project is done, it probably wouldn't be renewed. They would hand us a product that we can either use or not use, and then we move on to something else. So we're looking for a small management team that will go out and identify these areas and work with us to say, yeah, if that works, then that would really be beneficial to us, and go and get that. So it's kind of a change in the way we do things. We started the solicitation early because the USRA cooperative agreement actually ends 1 year from now. So we want to have the new organization in place at the end of the USRA cooperative agreement and put in place so that there's a 1 year overlap between the new research and technology folks and the old research and technology folks, assuming that they could be different. So that's kind of planned for the future. We have a lot of coordination within the agency. We have regular meetings with the chief medical officer and the chief scientist. Both of them have a vested interest in the outcomes of our work. The crew health and safety program we work with very closely. We're doing more and more work with the space biology program. Space biology and human research, before the HRP was started, used to be conjoined, and we're working to try to figure out where is there overlap. Their focus is really looking at using space to answer fundamental questions in biology that you can't answer on Earth, things that are probably related in most cases to gravity and the role of gravity in evolution and role of gravity in development of various species. There is a lot of overlap between what they do and what we do. Theirs is a little bit lower on the TRL or CRL, countermeasure readiness level, than ours, but there are times that they're doing things that would directly feed into answering our questions. So we're working more and more closely with them to try and do joint solicitations and to work out areas of interest and try and leverage each other's resources. We work closely with ISS Utilization Office on a regular basis. We work closely with AES. Actually, AES and HRP are in the same appropriation line, the exploration, research, and development. So when Congress appropriates their money, it gets split. It used to get split equally between us and AES. I think in the next few years, AES is going to be getting a little bit more of that for some things that they're working on. We work with STMD. Been working fairly closely with Orion, but that's starting to pick up now. There's a number of questions that Orion needs to have answered that I think fit directly in our bailiwick, and so we'll be focusing on some of those near-term questions. And then while they're not within the agency, CASIS is another new player that are bringing in folks from the commercial sector to do work on space station. A lot of it is biomedical, some of it is fluid physics and other sorts of non-biomedical stuff, but where there's biomedical stuff of interest where we can work together on things, we will. In fact, they have an effort that they're calling the Good Health Initiative that we're working closely with them. We in space biology are working closely with them, and that's kind of spinning off stuff that we learn in space back to the terrestrial sector and vice versa.
What does P4 medicine mean?
P4 is sort of an emerging technology. You may have heard of personalized medicine or precision medicine. One of the world's leaders in that whole effort has a project he's calling P4 that he wanted to get us involved with. He's doing a 100,000 subject study. It's kind of a modern day Framingham study, and he's going to recruit 100,000 people, look at multi-omics analysis of everything within their body, at the microbiological level, and then have them come back every year for an update for 20 or 30 years. And at the end, at some point in time, he can look at some measures of health versus non-health in this huge population and kind of track it back to which genes might have been responsible or which metadata, which environmental factors might have been influential in pushing people in one direction versus the other. And so it's precision, preventative, something else. There are 4 Ps in it, and he's calling it P4. We were very interested in working with them on that. He's a board member for CASIS, and CASIS hasn't yet embraced this as one of the things that they're going to go after as part of their program. But this is one of the things that is a possibility for the future with the Good Health Initiative. We also have a lot of interactions with our international partners. This is what John Charles is responsible for. We have a number of working groups. Given our own limited resources, both financial resources and access to space and analogs, it makes a lot of sense for us to be leveraging others' resources, and every country's in the same position. So we find a lot of camaraderie out there, not only with the ISS partners, but also with other partners who are spacefaring nations. We're able at this point to work with virtually everybody that has humans in space except for the Chinese. The State Department doesn't let us work with the Chinese. Not that they're not interested, they would like to work with us. And we attend conferences that the Chinese come to, and we pay attention to their science. But we do a lot with ESA, of course, with the Canadian Space Agency, and with the Russian Space Agency, and with the Japanese Space Agency. We also have direct interactions with CNES in France, and DLR in Germany, and OSI in Italy. We have a number of working groups, and we have bilateral agreements. This is a chart that John has. So we have some international meetings that we have on a regular basis. We have something called ISLSWIG, the International Space Life Sciences Working Group meeting that all these people attend. We meet twice a year, and it switches from agency to agency. Talking about coordination, we put out joint solicitations at times. We talk about what things might overlap with each other, and we try to avoid overlap and try to look for win-win situations where we can. We have a very collegial relationship that's been going on since 1992, so it's a long-term one. We have also a joint working group with the Russians that we meet once a year with them. That's been going on since the 70s, I think. It's a very long duration one. We have other working groups that are composed of international folks, countermeasures working group, spaceflight analog research working group that meet as they need to. These things kind of pop up and they'll be alive for 4 or 5 years or whatever is a useful lifetime, and then they'll go away depending on what the overall objectives are. So we have a lot of interactions with the internationals as well. The approach we take to solving the problem is now well coordinated, in part because of our co-location with the Health and Medical Technical Authority. So we work with SA, with the local Chief Medical Officer Jeff Davis, who stands in for Rich Williams and company here at JSC, to make sure that we're doing the right thing. Like most management approaches to solving problems, we do a lot of work that follows a systematic planning, tracking, controlling, identifying, analyzing, and then communicating and documenting is in the center. But we follow a standard risk management model. We've modified it a little bit for our own purposes. The way that we look at it and our risk management approach, our architecture is we start with evidence. What's the scientific evidence or the medical evidence that there's a risk? From the evidence, we identify what the risks are, and then once we know a risk, and risks tend to be big things, like the risk of getting cancer from radiation during deep space mission. That'll be a risk. We break that down into gaps. What do we know about that? What do we need to know? What do we know? What don't we need to know? Those gaps turn into tasks, and those tasks turn into deliverables. The deliverables are often, from our program, more evidence, and so then we keep going around this loop. Another way of looking at it is here. So we start with evidence up here in the upper left, and evidence can come from science, from clinical operational experience. From the evidence, we create risk. Now, this box is reviewed externally by the Institute of Medicine. That's part of the National Academy of Sciences. Actually, they just changed their name a couple months ago. Now they're called the National Academy of Medicine. So now they're NOM and not IOM. So that's the starting point. Once we have risk within the program, we develop the gaps, and we develop a prioritized implementation effort. So risks turn into gaps. The gaps turn into an integrated research plan. How are we going to how are we going to answer those gaps with research and or technology development? These are reviewed by standing review panels that we set up through the NRES group at headquarters, who come in once a year and look at our evidence and look at a research plan, and they give us some advice on things that we might be able to do to make it better. From the research roadmap, we develop our solicitations and directed studies. Those directed studies are our way of going out and procuring the work that we need to have done to answer the gaps. These things are, the outside overview process for that is the peer review process, and NRES also sets that up, so we get independent experts in each of the scientific disciplines to come in and review the proposals and grade them from a scientific merit. Once we've selected those proposals, we give people money to go off and do their work. It's usually 3 years at a time, so we don't get results instantaneously. These are usually long-term things. Results come in during the time in deliverables, and then we have our customers review those results in deliverables, and those results feed back into our evidence base, and so we go around again. So the customer plays a role here, and then we feed into the program. So we do this loop continuously, and in the last couple of years, we've increased our reliance on making sure we're working on the right risks by working closely with the HMTA through the Human System Risk Board. Yeah?
On that last slide, when you have a customer review,
Mm-hmm.
who is that? Who do you view as a customer?
Depends who the customer is. In most cases, if we're developing technologies, we have customer-supplier agreements that we develop, and sometimes it's space medicine, sometimes it's a program office. It could be Orion, it could be ISS. And otherwise, it's HMTA. If it's research, then the customer is HMTA, and the review is done at the Human System Risk Board. So the Human System Risk Board has been in place for a long time, but we kind of rejuvenated it about almost 2 years ago now, a year and a half or 2 years ago, to try and focus it on the exploration risks and make sure we were doing the right things. And so HMTA Jeff Davis agreed to increase the activity in that board. Dave Francisco is running the board. He's on Jeff Davis's staff. And this is a place for HRP to come together with HMTA and make sure that we're doing the right stuff. Now that board is composed of other people as well. It's chaired by HMTA, has HRP as membership, but also environmental science, human factors, spaceflight operations, and the crew office all have a seat at the Human System Risk Board. And depending on the risk that we're discussing on a particular day, then we'll have a mix of different people depending on their interest and what the risks are. This board now meets once a week, usually on Wednesdays at 1 o'clock, and it goes from 1 to 2 hours each week. So this is a very robust board that meets on a regular basis to make sure that there's a continuing throughput and conversation amongst all the stakeholders. From my perspective, HRP is developing for the risks that we've identified. HRP develops the evidence that gets reviewed and also the approaches. What risk mitigations are we considering, and how do we think this is going to best work as time goes on? That gets reviewed by all these folks, and we get some feedback in that forum. So that makes part of the customer review. What we get from HMTA is some idea of what the research requirements are. So sometimes risks will come in that we're not covering. Somebody will say, hey, we think this is a risk, and they could come directly to us and they could try to convince us. And as you might expect, there are a lot of experts here who are very convincing. But we use this board as a way of vetting those things. So come to the board and let's see if you can convince this whole group of people who comprise the board, and if the evidence is compelling, then okay, now we'll consider, depending on the status of that risk, we'll consider entering that into our program and starting to do work on it. So it's kind of a check and balance. So it's turned out to be a very good way for us to do the checks and balances in the system. But it's a very complicated board, and it's a very complicated set of problems. So we start off thinking about what the medical guys like to talk about, the hazards to humans during spaceflight. We kind of think of them on the research side as more of the stressors to humans and what stresses they bring to the people. But we've broken them down into 5 primary hazards or stressors that are roughly orthogonal to one another. So altered gravity fields, and they affect bone, muscle, cardiovascular, sensory, motor, immune, nutrition, behavior, and performance in all these different systems. Isolation, confinement, and altered dark cycles, this is mostly a behavioral and performance issue. Hostile closed environment, this could affect behavior and performance, the immune system, the microbiome, nutrition, toxicology, microbiology. Increased radiation can affect all these systems, and then distance from Earth, and we talked a little bit about some examples of that and the systems that they affect. Now, in general, the exposure to any of these hazards or stressors, the severity of the outcome depends on how long you've been exposed to that stressor. So part of our problem is trying to look at, when you look at different missions, whether it's low Earth orbit or cislunar space or Mars, what's the admixture of these things? How much more of one of these are you going to get than another? And that kind of drives the way that we approach the resolution of them. Our elements align almost one-to-one with these, not quite. HHC is really altered gravity, BHP. You'll actually see BHP in every single one of these. So they're the only ones that are really concerned about this, but they're also concerned about all the others. Space human factors and habitability, space radiation is interested in radiation, and exploration medical capabilities is really this distance from Earth, along with BHP. So we have sort of primary elements, and then there's a need for us from a program level to make sure that there's good communication between the elements on things that, on the stressors that might affect both systems. At the present time, as of January of this year, in calendar year 2014, we went through every risk that we had on the books as part of the HSRB and did a complete analysis against the planned mission, design reference missions, to try and decide what are the risks to people on these kinds of missions. We determined that there were 30 risks and 2 concerns. And this was sort of the outcome of this whole review. And this then becomes the basis for what HRP works on. It's also the basis for what OCHMO is concerned about. We took this presentation in January to Mr. Gerstenmaier and Dr. Williams and company to show them what work we had done to be able to say, yes, we understand the risk that we're up against. So we broke them down again by the hazards or stressors: altered gravity, radiation, distance from Earth, isolation, confinement, hostile closed environment. There are a couple of things that are concerns, and they're concerns because we don't have enough evidence yet to be able to rank them. We don't know whether they are or not. So that, to me, in the work that I do, I have to go and try and gather the evidence and say, is this a risk or not? So I work on the ones that are clearly risks, and then the ones that are not, I've got to go and make sure that I've collected enough data to be able to determine it.
Question.
Yep.
On that chart. On the one down here where it says risk pending data review, how much activity or what is it that has to happen to move into one of these?
Yeah, this is one of those ones that I was telling you came from the outside, came from one of our elements, and they said, we think you have a problem in cardiac rhythm, and we think it's a problem. Our initial review of it in the fall of 2014, we looked at it and we said, you know what? People in this age range, they were looking mostly at males, and the males between 45 and 60-ish, and there's a certain incidence of cardiac rhythm problems in that age group, regardless of who you are. And so the question became, is there really something related to space flight, or is this something that is a terrestrial problem that it's just manifesting itself in the people we have? So is it something that and so the group is going off to look at more specific data to see is there some component of this that's related to spaceflight that's over and above what you would have for terrestrial. Because the terrestrial stuff is separate from this, and it's kind of covered in the med kit. XMC is working on that, but we already have a med kit to deal with that, and we have already have selection processes and screening processes for missions, and space medicine does that as part of their day job.
How does that differ from a concern?
Concerns, so someone has raised the issue, more than one person has raised the issue that medications have usually a shelf life in the pharmacy here of no longer than a year. We're going to be going on 3-year missions. Are the medications going to be affected by the environment, or are they just going to wear out, run out of their time course? And we don't know, so we're going off to do some studies on that. Some medications will last forever and will never degrade, but they're forced to put a degrade, or maybe they want to because they make more money by selling them when selling new ones and haven't used up all the old ones. I saw something on the internet last night. Somebody said that there was a use-by date for some salt. Now, salt has been around for millions of years, and use it by 2017, or you have to replace it. It's kind of hard to imagine that it's going to degrade, but so. Nevertheless, we're taking that one seriously, and we're doing some work to try and understand what these things are and what are the approaches we might be able to take. Do we need different kinds of packaging? Turns out that one of the new technologies that's being developed is 3D drug printing. Might we in 20 years when we go to Mars, might that have evolved to a place where we can print drugs as we need to in space on the same printer we're using for our medical equipment, and the same printer we're using for food, and maybe the same printer we're using for parts for the station or for the vehicle. So it's not clear. There's a lot of potential in the technology development now, and we're kind of looking at different options. But the first thing in this concern is to try and understand whether, in fact, there's anything there. And so that's something. This one, there already are some folks that are convinced that it's a concern. They're bringing back data we already have. In these two cases, we're having to generate new data that we don't have, that we think has a credible possibility that there will be a risk there.
Can you go into, so you have some retired risks, do you explain that process?
Yeah, the retired risks are ones that we believe that we understand well enough and have mitigations in place and the right standards for any deep space mission. And so, HMTA can only go as far as saying, here are the standards. When standards turn into requirements when you're doing a vehicle design, and as long as the designers accept those standards and meet the standards in their design process, then we don't have to worry about this. So we have ways of resolving these. So another complication is that we are looking at a whole bunch of different possible missions, right? So if you look at low Earth orbit, we're looking at 6-month missions, one year missions. We're looking at coming down in Soyuz, coming down in commercial, coming down using different kinds of vehicles to go up in, and so there's a bunch of different things. We haven't really defined very well what we're going to be doing in cislunar space, and we don't know at all. We have some concepts about what we might do in the Mars vicinity, but what are we actually going to do is beyond us. Well, one of the first tasks for the HSRB was to say, okay, well, we have to set something down that will help us to understand the differences in risk to humans for different kinds of missions. So we created, and we debated these things for a long time, what we call DRMs, design reference missions. These are not fully developed by the engineering side of the house, design reference architectures or missions, but they're ones that affect the issues that we're concerned about. Mission duration, what the gravity environment is, what the radiation environment is, and how far you are from Earth. Okay, so those are the things that change from mission to mission. And whether you're in low Earth orbit, you're on a deep space sortie for a month, low Earth orbit for 6 months or a year, whether you're going to the lunar vicinity for up to a year, or maybe going out to an asteroid for a year, or doing a planetary visit, to the Mars system for 3 years. It affects each of these things in different ways, and so we use those as sort of the template for these are the things that we're concerned about, and thinking if we can bracket each of these kinds of things, then when a true mission comes up, we'll be close to what that mission design is, and we'll work on the specifics then. So when we work at the Human System Risk Board, we go through the same kind of process that I was talking about before. Somebody brings in the evidence. There's a risk owner and usually there are two these days. There's one that's kind of a research or technology expert, and one that's a medical expert. We bring in, we talk about the risk, we identify and analyze the the evidence that we have available. We look at the risk mitigation plan and what new evidence we might need to have. There's a full review, and then we track and implement year after year. So each risk is slated to come back through the HSRB on an annual cycle. So we'll keep on doing this. So there's an update every year. We go and look at new evidence. The outcome of the HSRB work is a risk disposition. There's more information as well, but the disposition, a risk could be accepted, which means that we have mitigation plans that are adequate to control the risk on that class of missions. Could be retired, like we talked about before. We don't need to worry about it because it can be controlled on any class of missions. Or it could be something that needs more work. It could require mitigation, and that's kind of the standard that we're working to. But there are some that require optimization. The example I like to use for this is the resistive exercise device that we have on station. Right? The ARED has been very effective. We were able to protect bone and muscle and fairly well using the ARED. The ARED is as big as my car. It breaks down more often than my car, weighs more than my car. It's not going to fit in a deep space vehicle. So what is the solution? The solution is we have to be able to provide equivalent loading of some sort in a new vehicle with a different kind of device. And that's what we call optimization. So taking what you have and saying, okay, we can do this. We know we've demonstrated that this works. Now, how do we get it to a mass, power, volume, crew time signature that is going to fit within the vehicle? And so that's the requires optimization. The ones that HRP works on are these, of course. These other ones, there's not any reason for us to do work on. We also have a set of assessment criteria. So once we have one of these things, we kind of look at an L by C chart, but it's tailored to the medical needs. So likelihood has only 3 categories: low, medium, and high. And high likelihood is anything greater than 1%. That's kind of a medical standard for high risk probability. Anything that's green we considered controlled or things that we can handle. Anything that's yellow are partially controlled. We might or might not need to work on them. And red are considered uncontrolled at this point. One of the other things we realized, though, is unlike any of the space programs we've had before, the consequences to the individual are not likely to be consequences that just occurred during the mission. Some of the consequences are things that could occur well after the mission. So the consequence of developing cancer after exposure to radiation, that cancer will not develop for 20 years, right? There are a number of other things that could have effects on the individual well after they come back from one of these long duration missions. So when we rate any risk against the DRM, we rate it in 2 ways, whether it has operational consequences, either on performance or on health during the mission, and what the long-term consequences will be. And they range from temporary discomfort or insignificant impact on that side, return to baseline within 3 months with limited intervention, no effects on quality of life, all the way up to death of crew member, loss of mission, and so on. So we have 4 categories of those that we try to rate where we can, and it's not always possible. We try to use PRAs to do the evaluation. In most cases, we don't have enough evidence or enough data to actually do a full-up PRA. So we're using a lot of expert opinion and what data we do have available to try and determine the status of the risks. An example of how we deal with this is the risk of spaceflight-induced intracranial hypertension and vision alterations. You've probably heard about this. This is one that we didn't know about until about 5 or 6 years ago. It was one that seems to have become non-obvious until we had long enough missions for it to pop up. This is changes in vision that we think are associated with fluid shifts to the head and sequestering more fluid in the head than you would on the ground for a long period of time that increase the intracranial pressure. That's one of the things that we think about it. So for each risk, we have a risk statement, we have a risk title, we have a risk statement. The primary hazard for this one is microgravity, but there are secondary hazards. CO2 might be a hazard. We have some countermeasures, but they're probably not terribly effective at this point. There are some other contributing factors, and there's a brief summary of our state of knowledge. We then go on, we have a 1-page summary of what the L by C looks like for each kind of mission. So we have our 6 DRMs, or 5, six DRMs. We have an L by C for each of these things, and we have an L by C for what happens during the mission and long-term health. Overall risk evaluation status that goes along with that, and then some ideas of what the deliverables are going to be, what we've discussed in the board are the deliverables and who's responsible. HRP doesn't do all the work here, so we have ISS, CHS, and other programs that play a role, but HRP is doing most of the new evidence development for these things. There's a tentative schedule and who's evaluating what. The important thing, though, from our perspective is where do we see ourselves now with the current state of knowledge for these kinds of missions? As you might expect, the most challenging ones are the deep space journeys, especially the planetary missions, because they have, the most exposure to all of these stressors for people. So each one of the risks has a page like this, and they're available. When you stack them all up, you look at all the risks that we have. You look at the in-mission operations and long-term health, and you look at the 6 different missions. And I'm particularly interested in the ones that require risk mitigation. You see that for planetary 3-year missions, there's a lot of risk mitigation that's required for both the long-term health and for the in-mission. So most of our focus in the program is to resolve these things for the 3-year mission, and if we can do that, then the same mitigations are likely to hold for the other ones. So we focus a lot on the 3-year missions, and all these RMs are ones that we have to work on. The way we do it, as I mentioned before, evidence, risk, gap, task, deliverable. And our deliverables, I think I mentioned before, knowledge, evidence to assess human health and performance risks, the validated health, medical, performance, and environmental standards, whether they're fitness for duty standards, permissible outcome limits, or permissible exposure limits, validated countermeasures and risk mitigation approaches, and approaches to minimizing mission resource requirements. That's the optimization part of it. An example, again, following through on VIP, are each of our elements that has assigned one of these things. We'll take for each gap. So this gap, this is the VIP problem, and the gap for this first gap that I'm showing you here is we do not know the etiologic mechanisms and contributing risk factors for ocular structure and function changes seen in flight and post-flight. That's a gap in knowledge, and they're saying, what do we have to do to answer that gap? And they say, well, we think we're going to need some studies. Either ground investigation or flight investigations. Some of them can be done in parallel. Some of them will be done in series. And we're thinking that we have enough money to go and solicit for these studies at this time. We're very optimistic that the outcome is going to be something that we don't have to follow up on, but we'll know the outcome and we'll be able to move on. And so for each gap, we have something that looks like this. We roll them all up into a single chart, single bar, and says, okay, here's our mitigation plan for the VIP risk. So it's red today. It's going to stay red, and we think that we'll know enough at this point in time to turn it from red to yellow, and then the mitigation isn't going to take much longer. We'll get it from yellow to green just after that. So this is kind of the schedule that we've developed for this research project based on this, and then all the other gaps that are hidden below. When you look at our whole program, we're looking at 23 risks that we think need to have research that are risk mitigation required, and 2 concerns. They lay out like this, and you get this idea that there's a bunch of red stuff, there's a bunch of yellow stuff we're working on. We're not so sure about this cardiac rhythm risk, but we're expecting that sometime probably later this year or next year, we're going to have the answer, and we think it's going to be that it's not a problem. So we're expecting it to be green. If they say, no, this is really yellow, then it changes things, and we go back and reschedule. The 2 concerns that we talked about before are here. Right now, we don't know what's what with those. We think it might take us until FY20 to be able to resolve those things, maybe earlier, but the plan right now is to not put a lot of high priority effort in. The ones that are coded in blue here are ones that at some point require station, so we have to get answers using station. The ones that are in brown don't need station or can't use station. So you'll see radiation down there. We're not going to get radiation answers in station. This chart, the very first version of this was about 2 years ago. I presented it to Mr. Gerstenmaier and the senior staff. At that time, the station was scheduled to end in 2020, so this bar was here. And there was a whole bunch of red stuff poking out beyond. And he obviously said that's not going to work, and he used that, went to the administrator, who went to the administration and said, we need to have station for a longer period of time because we can't answer the questions we need to answer. And that, coupled with the commercial crew issues and trying to get enough experience and runtime with commercial crews, swayed the administrator and the administration to say, yeah, we need to extend. So extending to 2024, it looks like we can turn most of the red things yellow. We won't get all the yellow ones turned green, but we'll just have to accept those probably, with the possible exception of radiation, but that's under review currently. So this is our up and out communication. Down and in gets more and more detailed as you go down. You saw that on the last page. Each of these bars is a accumulation of all the schedules that were built underneath it. Okay. So what are the worst offenders here? You probably have already gathered radiation exposure. And there are a number of different ones. So the radiation is the long-term threat of cancer, degenerative soft tissue injury, especially the cardiovascular system, CNS, changes in the brain. And these could, some of the recent data from rodents with plausible exposures to deep space radiation are suggesting that we could have problems during a mission if those things can be translated to humans. So this could be a within mission. We're saying it's unknown currently. And then acute, what happens when there's a solar particle event or a coronal mass ejection. And this one is green all the way across because we know how to shield that. And there's a requirement for that. You can shield that stuff. You can't shield the GCR. So they become the big problem. The behavioral conditions that I talked about, somebody not being able to cope with being that far away from home for that period of time, or lack of team cohesion are other ones we worry about. Exploration medical capabilities, and I'm not really too concerned about these because I think we understand them, and we're waiting in many cases for the technology to evolve to a point where we say, okay, now we have to cut and use the technology that's available. But it's moving very quickly, and I think we're going to get smaller and thinner and have better solutions. So I'm not as concerned, even though this goes out for a long time, that's going out that far because we can go out that far. Inadequate food and nutrition. This is the food problem we talked about. Human system interaction design, and then the VIP problem that we just talked about. Those are the heavy hitters for human missions to Mars, and those are the ones that get most of the airtime and most of our concern. And these are the ones that we really have to get from red to at least yellow before we fly. How do we do this? Currently, our program is being implemented in 3 different locations. By and large, most of the work that we're doing is in ground-based laboratories and in facilities that we provide. We're doing a lot of work on the International Space Station, and we're also working with STMD and others that are doing an SMD who have landers. We're getting data back about the radiation environment on Mars today. We've just put out a joint solicitation with Survey to look at what the regolith composition is, physical characteristics and the chemical composition of the regolith and the dust on Mars, Phobos, and Deimos, because we don't know. We know a lot about the moon. We know that the Mars regolith has a high concentration of perchlorates, and perchlorates, if you breathe them in, can be not good things for you. Question is, are they more likely to pack together? Are they more likely to be fine dust? And so, if you go outside in your EVA suit and come back in, are you like Pigpen with all this stuff coming off of you, and then it's in the atmosphere and you breathe it in? What does it look like, and how might it work? Until we can bring back some samples, we won't know. But there are some ways to get information through telescopes and other landers that might be useful to us. So we've got a solicitation out to do that. So we're trying to get as much information about that. In the near future, we'll be working with Orion and Cislunar Space. Skip Hatfield is developing requirements for a vehicle that will be in place in orbit around the moon. That would be a place for crew members to dock their Orion to and stay for up to a year at a time, possibly. And what are the research requirements? How do we prove things that we need to prove that we've developed in low Earth orbit and on the ground? So that'll be coming. And then eventually we'll define the requirements for the deep space vehicles. On the ISS, we're very busy on the ISS. ISS is a pretty good simulator of the deep space missions, but it's not a perfect simulator. So We know that radiation is different on low Earth orbit from in deep space because of the Allen belts and because of the mass of the Earth. We know that distance from Earth, if you have a medical problem, you can be down in a couple of orbits if you need to be. Isolation and confinement, yeah, it's got a big space, and you got a lot of crew members, and you got constant conversations with people on the ground, and you have a cell phone, so you can call your family whenever you want, or your doc. You know, that's not going to be true as we go on, but you know, for the most part, it's a really good simulation of some of the things that we're interested in. We have a very detailed fly-off plan for things using the station. We actually enjoy a high priority on station utilization. It's our best current analog, and it's really an important test bed for our technology validation. CASIS, by congressional law, has access to 50% of the utilization resources on station, and up until about a year ago, they didn't have enough work to even come close to that. And so we have been treating station like an infinite resource, and suddenly they had a step change in what they had brought in, and now they want all their 50%. So we've been scrambling to try and figure out how we're going to fit within the box until we get another crew member. But after CASIS, HRP has the highest priority within NASA, and then comes the technology development and the space biology work that gets done. You're probably familiar with the one-year mission that's going on. We have also a single one-year mission as a demonstration, but if we're going to get real good data, we need to have multiple one-year missions. So we have been talking about that. All of the international partners, except for the Russians, have agreed to doing further one-year missions, probably another 5 one-year missions with 2 crew members on each. And all the ops people here have agreed, although it's been more than a year since we went through all that, so we might go through it again, because it's really hard to find people that are willing to go up in space for a whole year at a time to do research things. But you know, from our perspective, if you look at a 1,000-day mission, you know, a meter long is 1,000 millimeters. You know, our experience is 180 millimeters, right? We're down here. You know, in the old days, the mariners would say, "Here be dragons." You know, the question for us is, "Be there dragons there?" You know, so if we go to 180 to 360, then we're at least a third of the way there, and we have some better idea about whether the stuff we're doing is going to extrapolate out to longer missions. Whether we've actually seen the resolution of whatever adaptive changes there are to the point where now we're in a steady state and we don't have to expect any more changes. I keep going back to the VIP problem. We didn't know about VIP until we started doing regular 6-month missions. You know, is there something else out there that's you know, subclinical we're not seeing yet, and that when we start doing 360-day missions, we're going to start seeing? Don't know, and I don't really want to start saying that there's a boogeyman out there, but there could be, and you know, it just would give us more confidence in our data and our ability to resolve these things. So we've gone through a bunch of those analyses, and I think there's a lot of possibilities there if we can get the Russians to agree. Otherwise, Mr. Safardini was willing to wait until we have commercial crew and just do it on our own so we can get the data that we need with our commercial access.
Dr. Pulski.
Yes, ma'am.
Last chart.
Yep.
The Russian reluctance, they've had more people with a year experience.
Yeah.
With what's their reluctance on partnering with us doing long-term missions?
I don't know exactly. I haven't been in those meetings. I think that I think it was mostly political, and you know, their position was that let's wait until the first one is done, and we'll see what we get from it, and then we'll decide on any future ones. So they were just kind of holding off and putting off. Okay. So I'm guessing that a year from now, after the current crew has come down and we start seeing some of the results, that we might have an idea of whether they want to play. But Krasnov is gone now, so you know that, you know, as their leadership changes, there might be a different position that they take. Okay. So we think it's important from a scientific standpoint. We have the support of at least up to Mr. Gerstenmaier that this is a good idea. Rich Williams thinks it's a good idea, and Safardini thought it was a good idea while he was here. So I think we have all the right players on our side, and it's a matter of, you know, whether we're going to get to do it with all the international partners. Regardless of it only being a demonstration, this first one-year mission also reignited a very good relationship that we had with Russian scientists during the Phase 1 program in the 90s. And we were able to work closely with the Russians on developing a set of investigations that were joint investigations. These ones that are dark green here, we had 3 that actually had joint co-investigators from both sides. Even with the short period of time, we had a number of other ones where we're sharing crew or sharing data with a study from the other side. And there's every reason to believe that what we're putting in place for the 1-year mission will continue on to future 6-month missions and future 1-year missions. So the advantage to us, again, is leveraging other resources. And when we talk about the U.S. crew time, that's the USOS crew time. Russian crew time is completely separate. So if we have joint studies, we can use Russian crew time to collect data and get more questions answered, and we can have a bigger end. So it's really behooves us, and the Russians, from their perspective, are very interested in working with our scientists and getting more publications out and getting more data out. And so these collaborations, we found some ways to do win-wins. And it turns out that it's not just with the Russians, but other USOS folks are getting involved with the first one, and we've now got the tools in place through one of the working groups, the HRP working group, to be able to do data sharing, crew sharing, and equipment sharing in flight for amongst all the partners, and we didn't have that before. So I think that some of the bureaucratic stuff, the things that get in the way and slow you down, are ended now. An example of this is the fluid shifts experiment. This is probably the most complicated experiment biomedical experiment that's ever been done in space. It requires in-flight 3 times on this crew at flight day 45, halfway through, and then 45 days before the end. A 4-day study where each day the crew members are involved in different parts of the science. Some of it is done in the U.S. module, some of it is done in the Russian module. It required getting our science and our equipment certified to work in the Russian module. The main reason we want to go there, this is related to the fluid shifts that might be one of the mechanisms for the VIP. The Russians have a countermeasure device they call the CHIBIS, lower body negative pressure. It's this thing. It's something that their crew members use on every mission. Our experiment requires us to do some fluid assessment and ocular assessment and intracranial pressure assessments without lower body negative pressure, with lower body negative pressure for various periods of time to see how that affects the fluid shifts. And so it was a really good thing, but this is in the middle of their galley, right? So this thing is, in order for us to do it in their segment, they have to clear out a lot of stuff, and we have to really disrupt their business for a while. But it turns out that we did the first one at R45, and the second one is coming up now. We're just getting ready to start that now, and I think it all went very successfully. And so it's kind of an example of the things that can happen when you need everybody to come together, and at the last minute, there's all these hurdles and roadblocks to doing things, but at the last minute we got everything together and we were able to do this. So I think this was a real good example of the kind of cooperation. It's very similar to the cooperation we had during the Phase 1 program. The other thing we're doing is we use a lot of analogs. There's just not enough crew members to answer all the questions we need to answer. Probably the longest standing analog we have is our radiation analog up at Brookhaven National Laboratory. We have the NASA Space Radiation Lab, and we've been using that for about 12 years now, 12 or 13 years. We have 3 campaigns per year where we can irradiate tissues and small animals, usually rodents. According to different scientific protocols, we can generate galactic cosmic rays particles, and now we've just updated this so that we can actually have a change in particle size and energy almost instantaneously, so we can make a full field space radiation type environment, have multiple particles be present at about the right density of particles per unit time necessary to fully simulate the deep space environment as we understand it. So we have investigator teams that are working together now, outside advisors, to try and figure out what's the best measure of the deep space environment that we want to reproduce here, and we have a lot of flexibility. So we've been doing that for a long time. About 2 years ago, we acquired what was then called the Habitat Demonstration Unit, HDU, was used out in desert rats and other things, and we brought it inside of Building 220 and refurbished it and turned it into an isolation facility for behavioral health and performance. We call it now the HERA, the Human Exploration Research, something or other. And at any rate, we're doing regular studies there. Last year, we did 4 campaigns that were 7 days each. It was sort of a shakedown set of campaigns. This year, we did 4 campaigns that were 14 days each, with 4 crew members on each, and we just finished the fourth of those last week. Next year, we're going to do 4 30-day campaigns, so we're starting to get longer and longer. But we don't think we can get as long as we need to here, and it also has some characteristics that are not quite like deep space. So we're going to Russia, IBMP, and we're negotiating with them to use their large chamber. They call it the NEK chamber. It's the same chamber they did the Mars 520 study in a few years back. And we're going to be asking them to do studies that are 4 months, 8 months, and 12 months in duration. So we're looking at using that for those purposes, and we're in the process of negotiating with them for that. We're also negotiating with the National Science Foundation, who has a number of Antarctic stations that might be very useful for us. We wouldn't be sending our own subjects, but we would use the people that they populate to do our studies. And that's moving along very well. They will probably give us access because they like our science and they're very interested in having us as users. So we're working out the MOU to get access. And this adds one more level of credibility to the isolation study, in that it's a very hazardous external environment. Whereas, when you're in this one or this one, you can walk out at any time and you're not going to have any problems. We've used other studies. NEMO, probably not it's a reasonably good analog, but it's not long enough, and so we're probably not going to be doing any more there because we have better control over the HERA. One of our investigators from the University of Hawaii is using this high seas facility that has been built in Hawaii. You might have seen some of the press releases this past week that said NASA is putting people in for a year, and this was one of our investigators who's funded. But we are considering whether that should be another isolation facility we can use for the behavioral health and performance problems. We actually have an RFI out that closed yesterday to find out whether there are facilities like this or other ones in the continental United States or the non-continental United States, any other U.S. suppliers of facilities that we could use and not have to go to Russia or Antarctica for. So this one is a little bit sort of halfway in between this and that. And we've heard about one on the top of Pikes Peak that might also be similar to that. Whether they can meet all of our scientific requirements, we don't know yet. So, and then the last thing is, we had for a long time, for over 10 years, we had a very strong relationship with UTMB and the National Institutes of Health to use their general clinical research facility to do bed rest studies, head down tilt bed rest studies. It turns out we started running out of questions to answer and didn't have enough throughput to warrant keeping that open all year long. And at about the time that we were recognizing that, the Germans opened up a brand new facility called NVHAB in Cologne that can do bed rest and also can change the expiration. It can change the atmosphere, so we can increase CO2 where the crew members are. We can change the oxygen tensions, and we can change the diet. There's a whole bunch of things we can do there. So we're now negotiating with them to do some buy it by the yard access for the studies that we still need to do. And we're able to save quite a bit of money by ending our relationship with UTMB and putting it into some of these other facilities for the work we need to do. Next step is cislunar outputs, and I mentioned, or cislunar outposts, and they actually can do a lot better for deep space evaluation. I have pluses for all the hazards for these. I would say that isolation and confinement is not going to be quite as big a challenge as for Mars, but it's certainly more of a challenge than it is for low Earth orbit. Distance from Earth, they're 2 weeks away, or at least a few days away, and not a few hours away. They're not going to be a few years away, but they're still more distant, so we have to come to grips with that. And they're in the deep space, so we're going to have deep space radiation, even with the mass of the moon helping to protect them some I think it's going to be a very different environment. So it'll be a good test bed for us, a good stepping stone. We have submitted now a set of requirements, research requirements, and demonstration requirements to Skip Hadfield and his group just in the past couple of weeks for what we would want to do during that. How do we get our research? We have regular solicitations. This is a snapshot from earlier this year. Each year we put out a flagship solicitation, usually in July, July 30th in 2013, July 31st last year, and July 31st this year. And that becomes an umbrella solicitation that allows us to add appendices without all the other bureaucratic stuff. So in 2013, we ended up putting 5 other appendices. Last year, we did 3 other appendices. Not sure how many, at least 2 more in this year. But these things go out. It takes a long time for us to get the proposals in, for us to review the proposals. But if you look at the studies, the release date was 7/30, and we actually did the selection in May of 2014. So it's 8 or 9 months typically before and then the people get awarded for 3 years typically. So we're flowing through these things on a regular basis. So we have a constant influx of new studies and studies finishing off so that we can answer the questions we have within the budget that we have available. We have investigators in 2015, 262 different grants, proposals that are funded for 204 investigators representing 29 different states. So we have a lot of people that are working for us from all around the country using the granting process. Intramural versus extramural. Everyone knows that we have a lot of intramural scientists here. We have them at Ames and at Glenn and at Langley as well, but the intramurals only make up about 1/3 of the total funded investigators. About 2/3 of them are extramural researchers. Most of the work we do is solicited. There are some reasons that we would direct work that can't be done by anybody other than a particular expert. A lot of times it's going and pulling out medical data from old records to try and support a risk, the evidence for a risk that we didn't have before, and those sorts of things. And then by project, radiation and human health countermeasures invest the most in research, and the other 3 elements, research and technology elements, invest a fair amount less. I think I'll skip this one. We tend to keep standard scientific metrics for the outcomes of our research. So publications, this was from Q2 of this year. We tend to be somewhere around 50 publications per quarter, a couple hundred publications a year from the grants that we put out. We get study final reports and annual reports. These are probably more important to the evidence base, not just the publications, but the Office of the Chief Scientist is very interested in these, and trying to get the message out is really important. We do some things in high impact journals, so we typically have somewhere in any quarter about 10 of our publications, or about 20% of them, end up in high impact journals, and those we're defining as journal impact factors are greater than 5. So we keep track of those kinds of metrics. They're not as operationally relevant, but they're important scientifically to make sure that we're maintaining a high quality scientific program. And we do education outreach. We do a lot of stuff with the general public. Chuck Lloyd is responsible for the Education and Outreach Office, and Lori Abity is his primary assistant there. We've partnered with Communications Office, the Program Science Office, External Relations. We track metrics, and we have some specific websites that we set up for giving information to the general public about the twin study and the one-year mission. You see, John Charles is a very good speaker, so you'll see him all the time on TV, because we always push John forward when they have to get somebody to talk. And one of the things that we're really proud of, and Chuck Lloyd started this some years ago, is this thing we call Mission X, Train Like an Astronaut. And this is really an outreach program. It's a way of trying to get elementary school age children exercising. It's a way of trying to combat the epidemic of childhood obesity that's actually around the world these days. It started a few years back with just a couple of countries, and now we're up to, I think this year we have about 18 different languages and about 28 different countries that are involved. And every country pays for their own stuff. We do the coordination, we put out the background information, and it gets kids moving. We have astronaut ambassadors. We had Krista Ferretti do a video from space that was passed around to all these kids all around the planet, that are doing these works, and they learn how to do obstacle courses, to do regular exercise, and it's a program that in order for them to get a certificate at the end, they have to go through a certain set of exercises, for a number of weeks during the year. So we have a lot of communication, we have a lot of agencies that are involved, and it's something that's been going pretty well. I guess overall in 2015 we had about 53,000 kids involved at the elementary level from around the world. So this has been something that has been really interesting too. I don't think I'll go through this. I think I'll just stop there and see if there are any other questions. That's kind of a, I know it's drinking from a fire hose, but that's kind of an overview of what we do, why we do it, and how we do it. Any other questions? Anything that you'd like me to talk about? Okay. Call it done then. Thank you very much.
See, and our director is looking at, so we thank you for keeping us up on that, and we'll certainly bring you back to give us an update later.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
So our next, for the Human Systems Academy, Jacob Bloomberg, the Sensory Motor Lab Tour is